The best time to start was yesterday. The second best time is today. No matter how late in life, in your journey, you start getting serious about retirement and saving, don't give up. The worst thing you can do is say, it's too late. Forget it. I'm just going to keep spending every dollar I get because I'm never going to be able to retire. And no, don't do that. You may not have the lavish retirement of your dreams, but there's going to be some middle ground, right? So the sooner you can start, the better. As educated as you can become, the better. Area I think people put too much emphasis on, which is investments. I think many people overcomplicate investments. I suppose, I guess why? Because we're bombarded with information from the likes of CNBC and Wall Street Journal and whatever other financial media you look at. And there's lots of shiny objects and this whole massive industry of investment strategies and products trying to get you to use things, buy things, whatever. Not saying they're bad necessarily, but it's really easy to overcomplicate and overthink investments. Turn off the TV. There will be lots of talking heads and clickbait articles and people trying to flash in front of you. So-and-so might get elected, so do this. Or if so-and-so gets elected, do that. In the short term, sure. I'm not saying the results of a presidential election or midterm election won't make the market move up or down, but that's in the short term. Zoom out a little bit over the course of 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. It doesn't matter.
Welcome to Catching Up to FI, a podcast on mindset, money, and life for late starters of any age on their journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Becky, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your hosts. We're here to help you with your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting from.
We're going to talk to experts, other late starters, and explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to FI together. Hello, and welcome back to Catching Up to FI. I'm Becky Heptig, your host, and I'm here with my special guest co-host, Mark Troutman. How you doing today, Mark?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
Great. So Mark and I are here today because Bill and his lovely wife, Karen, are on vacation. They are doing a bucket list trip to Morocco for her birthday. So Mark and I are going to hang out here while Bill is gone. So Mark, I think you've got a new endeavor on the books. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to lately?
I do. Since you're jumping out of the podcast world, I decided to jump into the podcast world. And I don't know if that's going to be a good idea or not.
Yay. Oh, I think it's going to be a great idea.
But yes, I am launching a podcast. It'll be under the Mark's Money Mind name. It is a personal finance show for beginners to experts where we'll discuss money lessons, timely topics, personal stories, have community members come in and share their wisdom. And it'll also be published on YouTube, so you can see my pretty face or maybe not pretty face, your decision. And the idea is to help people master their finances to enjoy a stress-free life of financial freedom.
Awesome. So tell me, when do you think that we will hear your awesome voice on the air?
Well, so the goal is to have shows launched prior to Economy, which is in the middle of March. So for a fun goal date, it was leap year, February 29th. So we'll see. That's only a few days away from this recording. So hopefully I'll make it there. But the goal is definitely by mid-March, the latest.
Yay. Oh, I can't wait. I think this is going to be great. All right. So today we are talking to Andy Panko, and I want to tell you a little bit about Andy. So Andy Panko is the founder and owner of Tenon Financial, a fee-only retirement planning and investment management firm. He's also the founder and owner of Tenon Tax Preparation, a tax return preparation company. Prior to starting these businesses, he spent 19 years in institutional capital markets financing and risk management at multiple global investment banks and a major U.S. insurance company. So Andy has a bachelor's in finance from the University of Delaware and an MBA from Rutgers. My personal interaction with Andy has been outside of his day jobs by listening and learning on his social media platforms. Andy loves sharing his knowledge of retirement planning and tax planning by creating content in his Facebook group called Taxes in Retirement, his YouTube channel, Retirement Planning Demystified, and his podcast, Retirement Planning Education. Andy talks all about IRAs, 401ks, Medicare, Social Security, and other retirement-related topics. I met Andy through the many friends I have in the FI space, and Mark and I both have listened to his podcast and been on many Zoom calls with Andy. There, you can hear his famous dad jokes. So, outside of the office, Andy loves woodworking, music, biking, hanging out with his family. In fact, Andy introduced Mark and I to a Led Zeppelin cover band that is amazing. Last fall, Mark and I went to see this band. They're called Get the Lead Out, and they were playing Red Rocks Amphitheater in the Denver area. So that made it even more special, and we really loved that. And then there's also something we may ask you later about HGTV. So there's many facets to Andy Panko. Andy, welcome to Catching Up to FI.
Great. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here and looking forward to it. That was quite the lengthy introduction.
So what was the HGTV thing? I have to know.
There's a show, it's not on anymore, but it's called AllAmerican Handyman. It was one of those elimination style competitions where 20 people would start and there'd be a series of challenges every week and the losers get booted off and eventually you whittle it down to one person. Think about it sort of like Top Chef, but for building and fixing things around the home. I was on the second season of that, which aired in 2011, I believe it was.
Oh, the many talents of Andy Panko.
Do you have a dad joke?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Come on, what kind of question is that? So I asked my new date to meet me at the gym, but she never showed up. I guess we're not going to work out.
Oh my God.
Do you get it? Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. All right. So Andy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, you summed it up fairly well. So I grew up and currently live in New Jersey. I'm the founder and owner of a retirement planning / investment management firm and a tax prep firm. I like woodworking, music, and family. I got 2 girls, 14 and 16, and married. So we live and do stuff around New Jersey. I very much enjoy educating, helping, explaining, like you said, between podcast, Facebook group, YouTube channel, newsletter. Just really get a lot of satisfaction and fulfillment out of putting out useful information to the world, specifically around retirement planning, financial planning, tax planning, all those things wrapped together is kind of what I feel like my purpose is in the world. So it's thankfully been a fun journey so far.
Nice. Well, we're going to dig into some of that today. And I just wanted to start out by saying we're going to talk about a lot of financial planning type details, but that this podcast today is for entertainment and educational purposes only. All right. So let's jump in. So Andy, what area of retirement planning do you think that people overlook?
I'll answer that, but first I want to flip it. And I'd like to start with saying an area I think people put too much emphasis on, which is investments. I think many people overcomplicate investments. I suppose, I guess why? Because we're bombarded with information from the likes of CNBC and Wall Street Journal and whatever other financial media you look at. And there's lots of shiny objects and this whole massive industry of investment strategies and products trying to get you to use things, buy things, whatever. Not saying they're bad necessarily, but it's really easy to overcomplicate and overthink investments. And I think a lot of people associate planning for retirement or potentially hiring an advisor or whatever to be synonymous with investing. And investing is a part of it, but it's often, again, overcomplicated and people make a much bigger deal and focus out of it than I think they should in many cases. So to answer your question, what do I think people overlook as opposed to put too much emphasis on? It's probably twofold. One is just the non-financial aspects of retirement. Obviously, it's important to make sure you have enough and how do you efficiently use that. But things like you stop work after 40 years in a career where maybe you're working full time and you just stop cold turkey. And now what do? You have a lot of time to fill. Many people struggle with feeling like they lost their sense of purpose and meaning and reason to get up and get dressed every day. And that could be a real shock to the system and not in a good way. So being aware of that and having some sort of plan for the non-financial aspects of retirement, just as much as you plan for the financial aspects, that would be one. And secondly, it wouldn't be me if I didn't give a shout out to taxes. I think a lot of people overlook or probably don't know enough about taxes, not their fault, but probably taxes are likely one of the largest, if not the largest expense people have throughout their life, especially even in retirement, is taxes. So the more about that and the more you can try to plan around that, I think is good. But many people just probably for lack of awareness don't have enough knowledge or thought process around how to handle taxes in retirement.
Yeah, I like to think of it from the standpoint of there is an accumulation mindset and a kind of decumulation/retirement mindset. And if you don't mind, can you maybe give us some idea of what the main focus would be for somebody in their accumulation stage? And then what changes when you get to the kind of drawdown/retirement stage? I presume you're suggesting we should be looking at different things during those two different phases of our lives, correct?
Yes, they are very different. There's some overlap, but they are very different. Accumulation stage, I mean, I'm grossly oversimplifying, but basically the good rule of thumb advice is spend less than you make and invest the savings wisely. Now, you can go a lot of ways with that, but it really is sort of that simple at a super, super high level. In terms of investing, it's just don't focus on the things you can't control, like what sector is going to do better than whatever sector, or what particular stock is going to do better than the other. This is why I'm saying I think people overcomplicate investments. Trying to get that nitty gritty with things, you're probably just speculating and taking chance. Don't focus on that. Focus on what you can control. The overall allocation of your investments, how much is stocks versus bonds versus cash versus alternative investments versus whatever. The fees of your investments. If you are in actively managed mutual funds charging 1% expense ratio per year versus something like an index fund charging under 0.10% per year, that fee drag adds up and compounds over decades of accumulation. And again, like you said, Becky, this is not particular advice. This is not investing advice. This is just simple guidance and education. So those are the things you should focus on and just kind of put it on autopilot, right? Again, live below your means, save/invest the rest wisely. There is some forward-looking kind of optimization you can do in terms of like planning out tax type things. For example, are you just plowing all your money into a traditional pre-tax account like a 401k or an IRA? Might feel good now to defer tax on that money and save yourself the tax bill now, but that money's all going to need to be taxed eventually when you take it out. So maybe thinking forward a little bit and not putting all your eggs into the pre-tax basket and instead saving some in like regular brokerage accounts or real estate or whatever it may be that seems to make sense for you. So that's accumulation. Deaccumulation, unfortunately, I'd argue much more complicated, much more involved because you have this nest egg. Common scenario, people enter retirement, they have probably a sizable amount of money in a traditional pre-tax account, like I mentioned, 401k or whatever, probably have some real estate. They maybe have some Roth money in a Roth IRA, Roth 401k. Maybe they have some cash value life insurance kicking around. They're going to have Social Security most likely, or a pension perhaps. Maybe they have an annuity, maybe they don't. So you tie all these things together. Now you have to figure out, okay, I have all these things. How do I use them? How do I actually get money out of them? Do it tax efficiently. Do it while keeping in mind what to sell when I need to sell something to free up cash. Do I sell this fund, this stock, that stock? All these things come together and you can't really do any of them in isolation. You need to sort of factor them all together as one big cohesive plan because everything you do directly or indirectly impacts the other aspects of your financial life and accumulation. So it does get kind of tricky, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was one of those that, plowed everything into my traditional 401k and got to retirement and realized there was way too much there and had to pivot and do a lot of Roth conversions and so forth. I wish I had thought about that a little bit more pre-retirement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Steve and I just got lucky because we did most of our accumulation at the end, and near the end of his career, his income was high. His company didn't have a 401k. So in the end, we ended up with our money spread pretty evenly across always taxable, never taxable, and sometimes taxable type accounts. But that was just pure luck. So there's a specific question I want to ask you, and this is in the realm of worrying too much or not worrying enough. This is an election year. And so I hear people talk about their opinion about, depending on what party might be in the White House, of what that's going to do to the market. Do you think that people should be concerned about who gets elected and how that's going to affect the market and their investments?
No, not at all. Just completely tune it out, close the paper, turn off the TV. There'll be lots of talking heads and clickbait articles and people trying to flash in front of you. So-and-so might get elected, so do this. Or if so-and-so gets elected, do that. In the short term, sure. I'm not saying the results of a presidential election or midterm election won't make the market move up or down, but that's in the short term. Zoom out a little bit over the course of 1 year, 5 year, 10 years. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Like look at Google. I don't have the chart in front of me, but any chart you find, and there's multiple out there along these lines, that'll show each presidential administration and what the stock market did during those years, or even just not just president, but control of the three branches of government. Were they left or right leaning, and what the stock market did? There's always going to be nasty dips along the way for a variety of reasons, but you zoom out and something like the stock market, for example, no reason to think it won't go up long term. So short term, sure. I mean, it makes for good news and something to talk about in heated discussions, but you shouldn't have short-term considerations in retirement planning. Even if you're in retirement, someone who's 60 probably still has 20, 30 years of life left. That's still a long time frame. So tune out the short-term noise, because it's just that. It's noise.
And what about things like, so we're in a situation where the tax brackets will change in 2026 if nothing is done. How do you go about thinking about that or modeling that for clients or yourself when it comes to changes in tax law that are embedded or not embedded?
Right. That's a little tougher. This sort of bridges between short-term and long-term, the example that you're giving. So you're referring to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, where currently we are in a temporarily reduced set of federal tax rules, if you will, lower tax rates, higher tax brackets, income brackets. As it's written now, this lower environment we're in is scheduled to stop at the end of 2025, such that going into 2026, we revert back to the higher tax regime we had from 2017. So this can all change. Like, tax legislation is written in pencil is the best way to think about it. For what we know now, we have to assume the plan is going to carry out as proposed, meaning taxes will go up in 2026. And so plan accordingly. So if like you're doing Roth conversions, for example, objectively now is a better time to do them than in 2026, all else equal. But like I said, tax legislation is written in pencil. Depending what happens with this year's election, that could change whether or not we let this current low tax environment actually sunset or expire, or if it gets extended, or anything in between. Maybe it's some morph where certain provisions of the tax code revert back to what they were, others stay under this lower, more favorable one. It really all depends. So short term, yeah, you have to go on the assumption that tax rates will go up in 2026 by a few percentage points. Longer term, what's to say 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there's not another complete overhaul of the tax system that makes taxes lower or potentially higher? Like, we don't know, right? So short term, you kind of have a little bit of guidance. Longer term, nobody has any idea what's going to happen with taxes.
Mm.
Do you have any opinions on whether you think they will extend or not extend the current environment?
This is just complete speculation for everyone listening, so take it with a grain of salt. I think regardless who gets in office this election cycle in 2024, I suspect some of the current low tax provisions will remain. It's hard to make changes that are as sweeping as what the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act were and just let them completely go away overnight. So chances are some of it will stick around. I don't know it's going to stay full lock, stock, and barrel, but I wouldn't be surprised if things aren't as bad as what we expect they're going to be in 2026.
Yeah, I kind of have the same opinion, so I was just curious.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So I want to start diving into some specifics. And the first place I want to go with our conversation is to talk a little bit about annuities. I know that's an area that I am still somewhat confused on. I think it's something that I'd like for our audience to be a little more educated on what it is and what they
Sure.
can do with it. Because when I kind of started my FI journey, my opinion was annuities equal bad, but that's not necessarily the case. And I think they get a bad rap sometimes. So can you talk annuity
Yeah.
for us?
Sure. Love to. So whatever people listening, whatever you're thinking about annuities, I ask you for now just to put that aside, pretend like you know nothing about them, and let's just start with a clean slate and open mind. Like anything else, an annuity is a product. It's not inherently good or bad. It's how you use it, what you use it for, how or why you got it relative to what you expect it to do. That's what makes it good or bad. So I don't sell annuities, but I have to defend them. I think they're painted with a really broad brush unfairly. There's some bad annuity salespeople that tainted the industry and people's perceptions of annuities. There are definitely annuities that don't make sense for certain people, yet we're still sold to them. So someone's individual experience, maybe annuities are bad because I had one that was bad for me. But again, as a product type as a whole, they are not inherently bad or good. So what are they? This is where it gets confusing because there's infinite combinations of annuities and structures and features of annuities. There's not a lot of common denominators amongst them other than A, they are all private contracts entered into with an insurance company. B, all of the gains or earnings or interest within them, the taxability of it is deferred until you eventually take money out of the annuity. That's really it, honestly. Those are the only two things that all annuities have in common. There may be something else I'm missing, but those are the big ones. So now, when someone says, do you want an annuity or annuity is good? You have to be like, well, what kind of annuity? It's like asking someone, is food good? Do you like food? Like, how do you even attempt to answer that, right? Well, most people believe annuities are a pension-like thing where you get this guaranteed stream of monthly income for life from the insurance company. And for the most part, I'd say yes, majority of annuities are some flavor of that. But let's step back a little. There's an even simpler version. I assume most of the listeners know what a CD is, like a bank CD. It's you put $100 into a bank, you agree to keep the money in there for 18 months, 3 years, whatever term you select, and you're going to get a fixed rate of interest over that time. So at the end of the 18 months, the end of the 3 years, you get your $100 back plus all the interest that you got, whether it was 5%, 4%, whatever rate it was. And it's done. The product is over. You take your ball and your interest and you go home. Product is terminated. There are some annuities that function just like that.
Is that the MYGAs, multi-year guaranteed
Yeah,
annuity?
they're often called multi-year guaranteed annuities or MYGAs, MYGA. On the surface, they really function just like a bank CD. Now, where they're a little more complicated is they have surrender charges. Most annuities, if not all, vast majority of annuities have surrender charge, where if you take any money out within the first year, you're dinged, whatever, 5%, 6%, 10% in some cases, surrender penalty. And that penalty amount drops over the life of the product. So when you're 5 years in, 10 years in, whatever, depending on a particular annuity, there is no more early surrender. Now, in most annuities, you can get out up to like 10% per year without having to pay a penalty. But if you take out more than that, then the surrender penalty applies. So with a MYGA, think about it. If you put money in, assume you're leaving it there. This isn't something you should put in and like, oh, I might change my mind in 5 months and want to take it all out. No, if that's the case, do not buy that product. But if you have a certain amount of money that you're not going to need to touch for 3 years, let's say, or 5 years, whatever term you want, and you want a decent, respectable amount of guaranteed interest, a MYGA can make a lot of sense for you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one
Andy,
example.
do MYGAs typically pay better than a bank CD?
Generally,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the place where I've heard these used is, let's say someone in retirement might use a MYGA to build their cash runway. Like if you wanted to build some kind of ladder for your first 5 years worth of paychecks or whatever. Is that a place where a MYGA
Yeah.
would be used?
Sure. Yeah, it's
Okay.
possible. You can. I haven't seen MYGA terms shorter than 2 years. Typically, it's 3 years and 3 and beyond is where most the products are. But in theory, yeah, you can buy a MYGA that matures in 2 years and then 1 in 3 years and 1 in 4, then 1 in 5. So you can stagger yourself this laddering concept where you're going to get X amount of dollars guaranteed given to you every year from year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever it might be. Now, I use the term guaranteed with an asterisk because all annuities, recall I said they are private contracts with an insurance company. All annuities, you do face the credit worthiness and the claims paying ability of the insurance company behind it. So if I put 100 grand into a MYGA and I'm supposed to get 5% interest for 1 year, let's say, to keep the math easy, in 1 year's time, I'm supposed to get $105 back. Now, that is conditioned on the insurance company being in business and being able to pay me that 105. Now, in reality, most insurance companies, I would never deal with an insurance company that doesn't have a rating that has an A in it. I wouldn't go down to something that has a B in it. And insurance companies are rated by a few places, but the most common one is called AM Best. So if you see any rating with an A that starts with an A, that's good. Below that, you start to take some risk. Even then, each state has an insurance guarantee fund, sort of like banks have this federal FDIC insurance pot. Insurance is state by state, it's not federal. And each state has some sort of guarantee fund where, depending on the state, you're covered for up to $100,000 to $250,000 of coverage per insurance company. So keep that in mind. I don't mean to scare people with this thing that you're on the hook to the insurance company. If you stay with a well-known, well-rated insurer that's been around 100 years, I don't think you have anything to worry about. Worst case, if they do run into troubles, the state insurance fund can kick in and help out.
So just for clarification, you cannot buy an annuity from a bank. It comes from an insurance.
Correct. Unless that bank is associated with or has agents that also represent insurance companies.
Okay.
But no, like you can't walk into Wells Fargo and get Wells Fargo to issue you an annuity. It needs to come from an insurance company.
And you're not buying this through your brokerage firm. You're buying it through some kind of insurance agent of some type, correct?
Yes. Now, where it gets muddy is some of the large household name banks and brokerage firms do have partnerships with insurance companies. Like, this isn't a recommendation to use them or not, but Fidelity, for example, in the last few years, I've noticed that they're pushing pretty hard. If the Fidelity advisors will push pretty hard to gather your assets to manage them at Fidelity, and they'll also often try to sell you some sort of annuity. Now, it's not Fidelity behind them. Again, it's an insurance company, whether it's New York Life or whatever. There's a handful Fidelity work with. But yeah, so the Fidelity client may not know or appreciate the difference because it's Fidelity recommending this annuity to them. But behind the scenes, the annuity is with New York Life or something. It's not issued by Fidelity.
Okay, so we have a MYGA, which is similar to a CD or maybe even a treasury that you could buy in your brokerage firm. So that's one kind of annuity. Now, what other kind of annuities? I'm trying to help people think about different categories, kind of so the MYGA is like your CD category. Then what would be another annuity that would be similar to some other category that could be useful for people? Let's not talk about the ones that aren't useful. Let's talk about the ones that potentially could be useful.
So next would be something called the SPIA, SPIA, which stands for Single Premium Immediate Annuity. This, at its core, is you buying yourself, in effect, a private pension. Just like if you retired from somewhere that has a traditional pension that pays you whatever, $4,000 a month for life, you can buy something like that from an insurance company in the form of a SPIA, Single Premium Immediate Annuity. And this functionally, there's lots of flavors and twists to it, but the most simplest version is you give, let's say, $100,000 to an insurance company. You irrevocably give that money over. You no longer own it. In return, they say, okay, I will give you $7,000 a month for life. And you can get that paid monthly if you want. So whatever, let's call it $600 a month for life. So $7,200 a year. And that's it. You will get that payment as long as you live. If you die in 1 year, those payments stop. If you live to your 120, those payments will last your 120. That's the simplest form of SPIA. So for people that want or need guaranteed income to supplement their other sources of guaranteed income, which would be something like Social Security, or if they have a traditional pension, a SPIA is a decent option. Now, this is where it starts to get a little complicated. People, rightfully so, generally aren't comfortable with the concept of, if I die tomorrow, my payments stop and I don't get back this $100,000. There's alternate forms of payment option you can choose where the payments will last at least 10 years. So if you die within 10 years, the remainder of the 10 years is paid out to whatever heir you designate. Or for those that are married, you can get something called a joint and survivor payment option, where if you die before your spouse, those payments will live on for the rest of your spouse's life. And there's other combinations of things like that. But that's sort of the next most simple, potentially valuable for, again, people who want or need additional guaranteed income. A SPIA could be a really good solution for that.
And typically those payments are fixed for life, right? So that $7,200 in that example would be $7,200, whether it's this year or year 10, correct?
That's correct. There are some annuities where you can get inflation increases, but generally speaking, the vast majority of annuity payouts will just be fixed.
But they're stated amounts, right? So like a 2% adjustment every year, not necessarily cost of living like Social Security, correct?
That's correct. To my knowledge, there are no longer any insurance companies that offer true inflation protection where your increase is keyed directly off of consumer price index or something. It'll be, like you said, a fixed 2% per year, or maybe like CPI, but capped out at 4% increase per year, something like that.
Okay.
But keep in mind that there's no free lunch. If you get the benefit of being able to get increasing payments over your lifetime, that means all else equal, the payment you get now to start will be much less than if you were just to select a flat fixed payment throughout your life.
Or it'll cost you more. You got to put more money up front.
Right.
Yeah. Well, right. Exactly.
Yeah. You pay for the bells and whistles.
Yeah. And rightfully
Right.
so. There shouldn't be free lunch, right?
Right.
So you do pay for these bells and whistles.
So is this something to consider in conjunction with your Social Security, for example, or pension if you have one?
Yeah. So there's no black and white, this always makes sense, this doesn't make sense type scenarios. But the way I like to think about it, you all have probably heard of the concept of like the minimum dignity floor or fund number, or
There was an episode on that, as a matter of fact, that Becky and I did. We
okay, well, there you go.
The minimum dignity floor, base grade life. Yeah. I forget which number it is in the show notes. Maybe Becky can.
Yeah, we can put it in
top that
for sure.
But it's out there. Yeah. One way to think about it is, if you're going to have, let's just say, $60,000 a year of necessary expenses throughout your life, housing, taxes, healthcare, whatever, and you're relatively conservative and you want to ensure you always have enough to cover at least your basics, this is where an annuity in the form of a SPIA can make sense. So let's assume you're going to have $40,000 of Social Security perhaps, and your guaranteed expenses are going to be 60. So you got a hole of 20 grand. So maybe you consider buying an annuity where you get an extra $20,000 a year of guaranteed income on top of your Social Security. So now for the rest of your investable assets, not that you want them to deplete, but even if they do, and they do run out before you die, you know you have at least your Social Security and your annuity income that's always going to be there and coming in as long as you live. So that's one consideration.
And do you use these with your clients at all? Have you had any people decide to do that in any way?
Yeah, there's a few. And again, I don't sell annuities, which I think is an interesting arrangement, because I'm sort of an independent observer saying, I think it makes sense for you. And then I remove myself from the potential sales conflict of, buy this product because I get paid a commission on it. No, it's not like that. So there are a handful of clients. Like I said, the more conservative someone is, the more they are uneasy with having their nest egg invested in the market and seeing account balances go up and go down, the more quote unquote constrained they are financially, meaning like the higher the likelihood that they might actually deplete their assets in their life, the more an annuity starts to make sense to lock down a certain amount of guaranteed income. But for folks that spend only $50,000 a year and have $5 million, like, you're not going to run out of money. So unless you're ultra conservative and have trouble sleeping, seeing the market go up and go down, I wouldn't recommend someone like that lock up money into an annuity.
And is there a percentage that you suggest people like don't annuitize all of your assets, or only annuitize a percentage, or do you ever have any guidance and suggestions?
No, this is one of those things where it all depends. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the book Die with Zero. An interesting read. It has its flaws, but it's food for thought. Extreme example, you're single, you have zero care about what happens to your money when you're gone. You don't have kids or charities or religious organizations you want to leave it to. Like, you want to die with zero. So the risk there is you don't want to spend your money too fast and hit zero before you die. And you don't want to spend your money too tightly and end up with $5 million. Again, assuming you have no legacy concerns, you don't care, you don't want to leave money to people. how do you try to hit that moving target of not knowing exactly when you're going to die and when you should spend all your money by? In this case, annuitizing all your money, I'm not saying people should do it, but just in theory, annuitizing all your money could make sense. Whether you live 1 year or 50 years, you're going to always get these monthly payments coming in, and you're already guaranteed to die with zero because you spent all your money buying annuities while you were alive, right? So in that example, sure, I could potentially justify someone annuitizing most or all of their money if they fit that profile. In other cases where you do want to leave a legacy, where you are more comfortable with taking some market exposure to your assets, then you trend the other way. You should lean towards much less annuity exposure, if any, and then kind of everywhere in between, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, I kind of like thinking of it from the standpoint of what is my minimum dignity for / best great life, what have you.
Yeah.
Will Social Security cover that? If so, I'm good. If not, maybe add in a SPIA to cover that amount, so at least I'm good there. And then the rest I'm willing to have, in a regular pool of assets, because there are other things that we could bring up, like what about long-term care? What about, like you said, aging assistance? What about leaving a legacy or an inheritance? So, yeah.
And the fund bucket.
Fun bucket. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
The fund number. And, Andy, one of the things that Stephen and I have talked about, we've not made a decision yet about whether we're going to buy a SPIA, but it is definitely out there. It's a possibility for us because he and I are approaching 70 and we're thinking, okay, when I'm 80 years old, do I want to be spending the kind of time managing my assets that I do now? Either I'm not going to want to, or I might not even be capable of understanding all of the financial concepts and, managing the things the way we do now. So that's a SPIA is a tool that we may employ in order to just simplify life as we get older.
And that's a great way to think about it. And I 100% agree with you. There's a lot of validity to everything you just said from those points of view. People who dislike annuities will often say, well, the return on them isn't great. So just for example, I ran the math on some annuities and what their payouts are. And assuming you live average life expectancy, the return of this annuity is 4.5% maybe, typically. Rarely would it be higher than 5 from what I've seen if you live average life expectancy. If you live shorter than that, the return's even less. So people often say, well, why would I put my money in an annuity only getting 4-something%? I'm pretty confident I can beat that by investing in traditional stuff, stock funds, bond funds, whatever. To which I say true. Historically speaking, there's a better chance a well-invested portfolio could produce more income for you than an annuity. But you can't compare the two. It's like apples to oranges. An annuity, a SPIA, is insurance. It's longevity insurance. It's you insuring against the risk of you living too long and potentially outliving your investable assets. And all insurance has a cost. Annuities are no different. You can't look at an annuity as a way to make gobs of money in return. No, it's not that. It's safety, it's security, it's certainty, it's offloading some of the homework and stress and having to monitor things like you just said, Becky, and manage money. And so there's value to that. So you can't really just do like a numerical apples to apples comparison between annuities and traditional investments because they're fundamentally very different things.
So we could probably spend a ton of time on more annuities, but we probably should move on from there. But so thinking of Social Security as also another type of annuity, how do you think about when to and how to claim Social Security, for example?
Oh, we can burn an hour on this topic.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I'll try to keep it short.
Yeah. I'm just curious because that's part of the equation, right? We're trying to figure out how to.
Of course, it is. Yeah. Social Security is functionally an annuity, and it's objectively the best annuity that's out there, in my opinion. When to claim really depends. It depends if you're single or married. It depends if you have dependent children or other dependents, because there could be spousal benefits or dependent benefits that key off of you, and that can impact when you claim because you need to start your benefit in order for your dependents and spouses to start theirs off your record. But simple example, let's assume you're single. It then sort of comes down to a longevity break even. If you think you're going to live longer than mid-80s, all else equal, delaying your benefit as long as possible is probably a good move, because the longer you delay, the larger it'll be. If you think you're going to die shorter than average life expectancy, then starting earlier is probably a better scenario for you. Where it gets a little more complicated is when you have other assets. And like I said, tying together a cohesive distribution plan. If you have a lot of tax deferred assets like a 401k, delaying Social Security has a tax benefit to it where you can sort of spend down a good chunk of your tax deferred money, live off that while you're delaying Social Security. And you can ideally do so when you don't have a lot of other income already. So the tax rate you're paying on those 401k distributions are relatively low. So, and then fast forward, you do eventually start Social Security. That's taxed more favorably than 401k distributions are. And you will have already, like I said, kind of nibbled down your tax deferred balances. So when you're required to start taking distributions out of those accounts, those amounts will be that much lower. So that's sort of a second order optimization thing, but it's another consideration for Social Security. Married couples, again, it all depends, but rule of thumb typically is the spouse with the higher Social Security amount from the higher historical earnings should generally delay as long as possible, i.e. 70. The other spouse with the smaller benefit should generally start sooner. When exactly, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but often doesn't matter, whether it's 67, 65, 63. There's a lot more flexibility in that as long as the higher earner delays as long as possible, because there's going to be a survivor benefit where regardless which spouse predeceases the other, the higher of the two benefits lives on for that survivor. That's why trying to delay and maximize that larger benefit makes sense on behalf of both spouses.
Yeah. Mike Piper was on the show, and maybe that could be in the show notes. And there was a deep dive into Social Security. So I just kind of wanted to get the top level kind of view, which you and I think very similarly. But yeah, if people want to dive deeper, they should probably go back and listen to that Mike Piper episode, and maybe that'll be in the show notes as well.
Yes, we can definitely do that. And I like the comment that you made, Mark, about that Social Security is an annuity. And again, annuities have gotten a bad rap in some circles, but sometimes they can be like buying additional Social Security, which if that would be possible, we would all say, yes, definitely sign me up for that. So, Andy, we've talked about how to set up a way to cover your base expenses in retirement. And some of our audience may be a little on the edge about having enough to retire. That seems to be most people's concern is, do I have enough? But if you've started late, then that seems to be a bigger problem, and it's looming in the near future. So in your practice, how do you help people determine if they have enough to retire?
There's often not a clear-cut answer. You sort of have to triangulate from a few ways. One process is, like Mark touched on, in the minimum dignity floor concept. If you mapped out, let me start by saying there's no getting around doing the homework of you have to have as detailed as possible understanding of your current expenses and what expenses may be in the future. Now, we don't know that. The future will change, but if you don't at least start with knowing what they are today, you're flying completely blind with trying to guess what you think your expenses are going forward. So you have to do that first. So let's assume you do that, and your expenses are $100,000 a year is what you figure you need to spend, just picking a number. Then you come at it a few ways. So against that, we look at what sources of a guaranteed income will you have. Let's say you're going to have Social Security, and we know it's going to be $40,000 when you start. So that means 40 out of your 100 will be covered by that. You're left with needing $60,000 a year. And I'm stripping out inflation for now. I'm just trying to keep the numbers super simple. So I need to spend $60,000 a year for the rest of my life. How much money do I need to support that? You can further dig in and dissect how much of that 60 is absolutely necessary versus how much is discretionary or fun. That can sort of help you change things a little bit. But let's just assume all 60 is money that I need to spend. No negotiation, no give. There's lots of ways to go about it. One is something called the 4% rule, which I'm sure a lot of people have strong opinions about, and we can save this for another topic, but is a really good back of the envelope, quick and dirty litmus test. It's not the end all be all, but it is a good starting point, which basically says if you start retirement with a portfolio of, let's just say, $1 million, historically speaking, you can withdraw 4% of that in the first year. And then every year going forward, increase that withdrawal by the amount of inflation. So quick numbers, if you have $1 million to start retirement and you expect you're going to live 30-ish years, typical retirement length, then 4% rule would say you'd be fine taking out 40 grand this year and then inflation every year thereafter. So working backwards, if you know you need to take out 60 grand this year, that would be what? That would be $1.5 million using the 4% rule in reverse. $1.5 million you should have saved to support that. Now, a few thoughts. 4% rule is, I would argue, conservative because it was sort of the worst case outcome over the last, that was roughly 100-year time period they looked at. And it's fixed and rigid. In reality, most people will sort of pivot and rein in expenses a little bit if and when the markets get really bad or what have you. So maybe starting at a 5% withdrawal is safe enough and sustainable if you're willing to adjust, adapt along the way. So that's a good starting point. Other things to factor in: if you own a house and you have home equity, a lot of people have a lot of equity locked up in their house. That's another source that could be monetized somehow, whether it's selling it and downsizing to a smaller home and unlocking a few $100,000 perhaps of equity that you throw into your pot to now use, or potentially reverse mortgage, which could make sense for some people. It's not a first line of defense for everyone, but for some folks, spending the equity in your house while you're alive, as opposed to dying with a fully paid house just for it to go to your kids and them to sell it, and because they don't want the house. That's another consideration. So anyway, that's how we sort of approach it. Look at where your expenses are going to be. Look at what fixed income you're going to have already, Social Security, pensions, and or annuities if you have them. And then kind of back into how much portfolio is a reasonable range to assume you have to support the level of expenses you need.
So what advice would you give to someone who is afraid that they're not going to get there, that they're not going to be able to accumulate enough money to fit those parameters that we just talked about? And I know that for some in our audience, they may be thinking, oh, well, I'm just going to have to work longer. And for some people that's possible. But as last week, we talked to Kevin Lyles, and he made the comment that that's not always possible, that sometimes retirement comes on you at somebody else's choice, either downsizing or whatever, happens. So what advice would you, or suggestions would you give to someone that is saying, I don't know if I can get there before I am going to have to stop working?
I mean, frankly, for some people, retirement just isn't feasible, right? Like at one extreme, you didn't save anything your whole life for whatever reason. It wasn't necessarily any of your fault, but you didn't save anything. And you're only going to have Social Security that may not be enough to live on. A lot of people do. I mean, for many folks in the country, that is their sole source of income. So it's possible. So that would be sort of one end of the spectrum is, am I willing and able to do that for retirement and live solely on Social Security if I have truly no savings? Or more realistically, you're probably going to save something. And so this is where you need to be flexible, set reasonable expectations for yourself, whether it's working with an advisor or there's lots of self-guided, self-use tools and resources you can use to try to get that figure of what is enough for the retirement I want to have and work toward that. Like you said, working is incredibly powerful, whether it's part-time, full-time for 1 more year, 2 more years. The body and mind's ability to earn wages is an incredibly useful tool. For some people, it's not an option, whether you're pushed out of the workforce by your body or your employer asking you to leave, telling you to leave, in which case that can either mean change expectations for what you want your retirement to be and how much you plan on spending. Many people don't want to be a burden to loved ones, but maybe your retirement plans now mean you have to move into a mother-daughter or whatever, a house with your child to help share expenses and minimize expenses that way, perhaps. Be willing to spend less if and when times do get rough in the markets or inflation gets really high. If there's less wiggle room in your plan to make things work, you need to be more committed to adapting if and when necessary by trimming expenses when you have to. Some people may not be able to. You may already be living at the bare minimum, in which case that could be one of the scenarios where retirement, frankly, just isn't really feasible for you. But for other folks, it takes a lot of willingness to adapt, reasonable setting of expectations, and working longer if possible. There's no magic bullet in investing. Don't invest more aggressively to try to boost your pot faster. I mean, that's just asking for trouble. There really isn't shortcuts, unfortunately.
And I know that's a temptation to folks in our audience of they wake up late and think, I don't have enough time to do this the traditional way,
Yeah.
so I'm going to take more risks. And that's usually not a good idea. Yeah.
No, there's no better time to start. What's the saying? The best time to start was yesterday. The second best time is today, or something along those lines, right? No matter how late in life in your journey you start getting serious about retirement and saving, don't give up. The worst thing you can do is say, oh, it's too late. Forget it. I'm just going to keep spending every dollar I get because I'm never going to be able to retire. And no, don't do that. You may not have the lavish retirement of your dreams, but there's going to be some middle ground, right? So the sooner you can start, the better. As educated as you can become, the better. There's lots of great free resources like your podcast, like my podcast. There's a whole host of podcasts, blogs, videos out there for people to learn a tremendous amount through. Even for those that want a little more guidance and help, you don't necessarily need a full-on advisory relationship. There's some other more user-friendly, user-direct methods, whether it's software or kind of membership to clubs or groups that give you sort of a guided kind of planning process. So there's ways to get help and education that aren't necessarily cost prohibitive.
Andy, could you give us a few examples of that? Because I know that some people hire an advisor for their whole accumulating and retirement life, and some people don't. And I've had conversations with folks about, even if you don't have one on board now, that it's not a bad idea sometimes to hire one for a short period of time to just give it a second look. But I mean, what if they just can't afford to spend money hiring an advisor because they need to hang on to every dollar that they're able to save right now?
Right.
So what resources would you suggest?
There's lots of great free resources if you're willing to put in the time and the brain power to follow them and soak them up. Like, I mean, there's too many to list, but again, podcasts, blogs, YouTube channels like your podcast, like the stuff I put out. I'm a big fan of Roger Whitney's podcast, Retirement Answer Man, the Retirement and IRA Show podcast. Very technical, but incredibly valuable knowledge and education there. So there's things like that that are truly free. If you want to get a little more in the weeds and actually build out your own plan, there are relatively or very cost-effective retirement planning tools, and I'm not affiliated with them, but there's a software called New Retirement, which I think is maybe $100 a year, maybe slightly more, but really robust, impressive financial planning software that's quite reasonably priced.
And Mark, you've used that, right?
That is one that I talk to people about because it is customer facing. So you don't have to be an advisor to use. And actually it's very robust. They're doing a really good job with that software. And that's one that I usually suggest people do if they're willing to do the work. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. It takes a lot. You got to learn the basics first to even know what to do with the software. So that's where, again, the podcasts and blogs and stuff come in. But that software is a great tool to build a pretty robust plan for yourself. Next step up from there would be like, in full disclosure, I am associated with the Rock Retirement Club, but it is a paid membership group where lots of tools and resources and access to professionals and lots of sort of guided assistance with you building your own plan using the resources available to you. That costs more than the $100 a year for new retirement, but you get a lot more for it. So something like that would be sort of the next step and next price point in my view. And then if you do want a full-on proper advisor relationship, you don't have to commit to doing a full annual ongoing thing. There are increasingly more advisors who offer hourly services or one-time plans, for example. And the best place to find them is a website called adviceonlynetwork.com. It's a website one of my buddies put together because there wasn't this central spot to find advisors who don't manage investments, who only do hourly and one-time limited engagements. So we created a site. And there's, I don't know, probably 50, 60 advisors on there now who are all advice only. You can screen through them by their specialty, by geography, by credentials, by whatever. That would be more expensive because typically these folks are charging $200 to $400 an hour. So you're looking at thousands of dollars to have a plan made by them.
And just what does a plan take, just so people know, like how many hours would it typically take an advisor to put together a plan at that rate, for example?
It really depends how complex you are. The average fee for a one-time plan, I'd say ranges from $2,000 to $5,000.
Okay.
And it'll be pretty comprehensive. It'll take into account all of your income, assets, liabilities. They'll look at your insurances. They'll look at your your home ownership, and give you this detailed set of projections and recommendations for investments, for saving more, for spending less, for tax optimization, typically, what to do about houses, what to do about insurance coverage. So that you're looking at a few $1,000s.
All right.
So people that want that and are willing and able to pay, that would sort of be the next step. And then beyond that would be like a full-on ongoing advisor where, depending how they charge and or how much assets you have, I mean, you're looking at $5,000 to $15,000 a year recurring. So that's not going to be worth it for a lot of people. And I don't recommend everyone get an advisor, but those that want that, there's that option as well.
All right. So to put a bow on this, what I heard was that for folks that may be on the edge of having the assets that they really would like to have for retirement, maybe they don't, that some flexibility is in order, setting realistic expectations. I think sometimes folks kind of think, oh, I'm just going to save what I can for the next 10 years and it's going to be fine and I can retire in luxury. And that may not be feasible. So to be flexible, maybe have a part-time job we've talked about a lot before, set some realistic expectations, and be willing to educate yourself, which is what we are attempting to do here, to give folks an idea of the kinds of things that they can learn about themselves, and that there's lots of resources out there. Because I always tell people, you may not can retire the way you would want to, but anything you do today is going to make your future self more comfortable and less stressed. And so, yeah, great. All right. So Andy, what else would you like to throw out here? What other ideas would you have for our late starter audience?
Just don't give up. Like I said, the worst thing you can do is say, forget it. It's too late. The best time to start was yesterday. The next best time is today. Educate, educate, educate. There's lots of tremendously valuable and insightful resources out there, completely free. You just have to know where to find them. And once you find them, put the time in to actually soak them up. You're not going to learn this stuff overnight. Depending how quick you learn and how much effort you put into it, it will take months to really get a good grasp on all this, especially if you're starting from a base of, in fact, zero knowledge. And just be honest with yourself and your expectations and your planning and your projections. And that's probably, work is powerful. The more you can work, the better if you are really constrained, but realize that may not always be an option.
And Mark, along with that, I would add community.
Yes. Surrounding yourself with other people that are walking a similar walk and helping each other. Think, the Catching Up to FI Facebook group, certainly Taxes and Retirement Facebook group that Andy has is a wealth of knowledge, super smart people in there. And find your tribe, and you can learn together and probably learn a lot more as a collective group than trying to do it all on your own.
Yeah, I think so. And I can't stress enough the events that are out there for folks to join, the CUtFI, economy, local meetups. I learn something every time I get together with a group of people. And we've had, I'm thinking off the top of my head here, Andy, this episode is going to air on March the 3rd, which means we've had our part 1 of On the Road with the Slackers. So our audience has heard a little bit about the community that Mark and I are a part of. And this week we'll have part 2. In fact, we were just with our Slacker group in Phoenix having a great time this last weekend. All right. Andy, thanks so much for joining us. I really value the explanations that you gave us about annuities. I would like to dive deeper into it, but that will have to be for another day. But I think you did a great job of giving folks an overview of what they are and the fact that they might be considered in certain situations. So, Andy, if somebody wants to reach out to you, where can they find you?
If you want to contact me directly, probably email is andy@andypanko.com, or all my various social things are looped together in one website called retirementplanningeducation.com. That's kind of the hub to the various groups and blogs and YouTube and stuff.
And you also have a lot of free resources on that website, if I recall, correct?
A lot of free resources, yes. And they're all truly free. You don't have to cough up your name or phone number. It's just click it and download it. There's zero having to me potentially market to you. Just go ahead and get whatever you want off that
Awesome.
site.
That's one of my go-to resources for sure.
Awesome. Andy, just throw out a couple of examples. What kinds of stuff could folks find there?
So there's a summary of all like the tax brackets and things. There's a summary about how RMDs work and the tables for how to calculate those. There's a summary about the rules around when you can take money out of a Roth IRA without tax or penalty. There's a summary about how to calculate the various different modified adjusted gross incomes that go into the different areas of the tax code. There's probably 60, 70, I didn't make these, I pay for them and make them available to you, flow charts and checklists for all sorts of things. Social Security, insurance, life events like death and aging, IRAs, investing, insurance, whatever. All that stuff, just click it, download it. Free to use, free to share. Do with it as you please.
And what was that website again? Could you mention that just so people can get there?
Sure. retirementplanningeducation.com.
Awesome.
And the resources, is that in a separate section of that, or how would you get to that resource section?
When you go to the main site, retirementplanningeducation.com, you see along the top, there's a menu. There's one for the Facebook group, one for the podcast, one for the YouTube channel, and you'll see a menu that's called free stuff. And next to that is another one called more free stuff. Because the website provider I use limits how many things you can put on one page. So I had to boil it over into two. But yeah, you'll see that menu across the top of the page.
Nice. Well, I hope that as soon as folks turn their podcast player off today, that they go there immediately. Because it sounds like a great place for our audience. That's wonderful. All right. Thanks so much, Andy. We hope to see you around soon.
Great. Thank you very much. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was a good one.
It was. And Mark, thanks for hanging out with me again today.
Oh, absolutely. Always a joy.
All right. We'll see you next week.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to 5. We would appreciate it if you could leave a 5-star review so that our message can reach others.
We are not lawyers, financial advisors, accountants, or tax experts. Please consult your own professional advisors before making any important decisions. Our content is for entertainment and education purposes only.
We'll see you next time on Catching Up to 5.